Richard Harrow's luxurious lounge. 4 women seated across. Richard, today, I'm giving you all a chance. These 4 black credit cards, for one day, are yours to use. Every choice you make will tell your story. The world worships wealth, but I want to see who will act from the heart. Caroline, is this really for us? Sir, do you know how valuable these are? Richard, smiling, just follow your heart, and everything else will reveal itself. Speech balloon. Please leave your thoughts and analysis requests in the comments section. Sparkles. Thumbs up, likes and bell subscribes will help us make our work even more exciting. Rainbow sparkling heart. Your support is our greatest strength. Cherry blossom wave glowing star. In a major city in the world, where glittering skyscrapers and sparkling markets brightened the darkness of night like day, there lived a man who everyone talked about. His name was Richard Harvey. Richard was a billionaire businessman, who not only had no shortage of wealth but also had influence over the world's largest companies. He had a private jet, a private island, the most expensive cars, and billions of dollars in real estate. But despite all this, there was a strange emptiness in Richard's heart. He often wondered who was really with him around him and who was only close because of his wealth. One day, Richard had a unique idea. He decided to give the women around him a test that would reveal what was really in their hearts. He took out 4 black credit cards from his treasure chest. These were not ordinary cards, but cards that had no limits. You could go to any corner of the world and buy something with these cards, whether it was a diamond necklace worth millions or a painting worth millions. Richard decided to give these 4 cards to 4 different women, so that they could see how their choices revealed their intentions and personalities. The first woman was named Caroline. She was a modern, smart, and self-confident woman. Richard always felt that Caroline's purpose was nothing more than her wealth. The second woman was Emily. She was an artist, drew pictures, and often seemed to like simplicity. The third was Natalie, a businesswoman with a yearning for advancement in her eyes. And the fourth was Richard's own housekeeper, Maria. Maria was a simple Spanish woman who had been serving in Richard's house for years. She never complained, always worked quietly, but Richard had a strange confidence in her. Richard called everyone together and said, "I have an opportunity for all of you. I am giving you these 4 black cards. They're yours for one day. You can go and buy whatever you want. Come back tomorrow and show me how you used these cards. But remember, this is not an ordinary test. It will tell the story of your choices." The 4 women looked at each other in surprise. Everyone knew that this was no ordinary game. This was a billionaire's challenge, and there must be some big idea behind it. Caroline went out first. She headed straight to the largest fashion boutique in the city. There she bought the most expensive shoes, bags and clothes. She knew that if she showed her personality strong and attractive, she would be able to make a greater impression on Richard. She laughed happily at each swipe, as if it were the greatest victory in the world. She had blown millions of dollars on her purchases. Emily took a different route. She went straight to an art gallery. She bought some rare paintings there, as well as some canvases on which she wanted to put her own creations. For her, the card was a means of nurturing her artistic spirit rather than a display of wealth. Natalie turned the opportunity into a business investment. She went to the office of a large tech company and made a deal there. She invested in a project using the card and thought that when Richard found out that she had used it to grow money, he would be impressed by her business acumen. Finally, it was Maria's turn. Maria had not had much of a secular education. She had spent years serving others. She trembled when she held the card in her hand. It felt like a burden. But then she went to the other side of the city, where there were orphanages. She went there and bought clothes, toys, medicine and food for the children. She also paid the bills of a hospital where poor people were suffering because they did not have money for treatment. There was a strange peace in every step Maria took, as if she was doing it not for herself but for humanity. The night passed, and in the morning the moment came when the 4 women returned to Richard. Everyone showed their purchases. Caroline took out a lot of branded things. Emily put paintings and canvases. Natalie proudly showed her investment papers. And Maria put a file of orphanage and hospital receipts on the table. Richard was silent for a few moments. He was watching everything, but the sincerity that was reflected in Maria's eyes touched his heart. He began to think that a woman who had nothing in her life had given everything to others. This was the moment that began to change Richard from the inside. When the four women placed their purchases in front of Richard, the atmosphere in the room became strange. Each one was proud of their things. Caroline's face was full of pride and self-confidence. She was thinking that expensive brands, designer dresses and expensive shoes were the real power. She thought that these were the greatest means of impressing a man like Richard. Emily had a special sparkle in her eyes. She was touching her paintings and art supplies lovingly, as if they were part of her soul. Natalie stood in a completely professional manner, arranging her business documents on the table and thinking that Richard would definitely appreciate her intelligence. But Maria stood silently, a sheaf of receipts in her hands and a slight shyness and humility on her face. Richard was looking at each item. He took Caroline's things in his hand, but there was no special expression on his face. He knew that it was all just a temporary attraction. He paused for a moment, looking at Emily's things. He had always had a soft spot for artists, but he also knew that these purchases were mostly the fulfillment of personal desires. He was a little impressed by Natalie's investment, but at the same time he began to think that it was also a game of self-interest to some extent. But when he saw Maria's receipts, a storm arose in his heart. Maria said in a very simple tone, "Sir, I didn't know what to do with such a big card. I have never seen so much money in my life. But when I felt that all this wealth could be of use to others, I went to orphans and sick people. I don't know if it was right or wrong, but I did what my heart told me." The room fell silent for a moment. Caroline laughed sarcastically. "This is crazy. You had such a great opportunity and you wasted it all on the poor. You know that with this card you could have built a new life for yourself." Emily looked at Maria with a slight smile, as if she was trying to understand the depth of her decision. Natalie also frowned and said, "In business, such decisions lead to losses. It is not wise to waste money on emotions." But Richard remained silent after listening to all this. A strange revolution was taking place in his heart. He was thinking that despite living in a world of billions of dollars, real wealth was perhaps what brought joy to the faces of others. Maria's action touched his heart. That night, Richard was sitting alone in his room. A glass of wine was placed in front of him, but he was not touching it. He was just thinking. He had spent a large part of his life making money. Every day a new contract, a new business deal, a new competition. But today, Maria's simple act had raised questions in his heart that he could not find answers to anywhere. He began to say to himself, "I tried all of these things so that I could know who was sincere with me. But today I also learned that perhaps I myself had never been able to do anything sincerely in my life." The next day, Richard invited the four women to his house again. He said, "I thank you all for taking this test seriously. Each one chose according to his own personality. But I have come to understand what the real use of wealth is." Caroline said proudly, "So you like my choice? All of this shows your status, and a person like you deserves it." Richard replied softly, "Caroline, all of these things are beautiful, but they are only superficial attractions. They cannot win anyone's heart." Emily asked with a hopeful look, "So did you like my artistic choice?" Richard smiled and said, "Emily, your art reflects your soul, but you also fulfilled your heart's desire. There was nothing special about it for others." Natalie said confidently, "My choice was based on business acumen. I'm sure you would have liked it the most." Richard shook his head and said, "Natalie, your acumen is impressive, but it was also for personal gain. There was no sacrifice in it." Then he looked at Maria. Maria stood there hesitantly. There was no pride on her face, only humility. Richard said softly, Maria, you taught me a lesson that no business school in the world can teach. You showed me that real wealth is that which is spent on others. Your choice has won my heart. Tears welled up in Maria's eyes. She had never imagined that her simple act would be given such importance. But the surprise and anger on Caroline, Natalie, and Emily's faces were clear. They couldn't believe that a maid could be more valuable than them. Richard decided in that moment that the next chapter of his life would be different. He thought of opening the doors of his treasury, but this time not just for himself, but for those who were deprived. And the credit for that decision went to Maria. When Richard praised Maria and declared her the real winner, a heavy silence fell in the room. A flash of anger flashed in Caroline's eyes. She considered herself the best and most attractive woman in the world, but today a maid had left all her glory behind. She said bitterly, "Richard, you have to understand that the world runs on money. All this help for the poor, it is only temporary. Tomorrow the same people will be in need again, and your money will be gone. You need a woman who can make you stronger in front of the world, not weaker." Emily said relatively softly, "Maria has done a good job, there is no doubt about it, but art is what the world always remembers. Wealth, if molded into art, becomes a light for future generations." Natalie said in a slightly harsh tone, "I agree that Maria has done something good emotionally, but in the business world, this thinking is harmful. Growing money is the real skill, and that is what I did. If you want your capital to be safe and strong, you will have to make decisions like I did." But Richard listened patiently to the three of them and then said, "I know that the world runs on money. I also know that art has its place in the world, and business acumen is also important. But today I have also understood that if money is not used for humanity, it becomes a burden. You three made choices for yourselves, but Maria made choices for others. That is the difference." Maria hesitated. "Sir, I have done nothing special. I just do what gives me peace of mind. If I have given clothes to orphans or paid the bills of the sick, it is no less than a treasure to me." Richard looked at Maria and said, "You think this is nothing special, but this is the most special thing. I spent my whole life chasing wealth, but today for the first time I realized that real peace is in seeing smiles on other people's faces." Having said this, Richard made an unexpected announcement. He said that he would put a large part of his wealth into a trust fund, which would be spent on the treatment of orphans, widows, and the sick. This announcement shook everyone. The news was all over the newspapers and media the next day. People everywhere were surprised how the world's toughest billionaire had suddenly become so soft-hearted. Caroline met with Richard and tried to explain it again. She said, "You are wasting your power. People will call you stupid. They will rob you." But Richard smiled and replied, "If my money can save someone's life, if my money can bring a smile to an orphan's face, then no matter what the world says, that's what I will do." Emily showed Richard her new painting and said, "I made a picture based on your decision. In it, a man is pouring a river of his wealth, and children are finding happiness in this river. Your decision can really change the world." Natalie tried to convince Richard about business. She said, "If you want, you can do all this in the form of a business. A foundation, a company that makes a profit as well as charity. This way, it will continue forever." Richard nodded and said, "You have weight in your words, Natalie. But remember, my goal is not profit, but humanity. If this goal is achieved with profit, then all the better, but if there is no profit, then it does not matter." During all this, Maria always remained behind. She was not used to discussions and praise. But Richard called her aside one day and said, "Maria, you have changed my life. I want you to head this trust, because I know that you will use this wealth in the right place." Maria was terrified. She said, "Sir, I am not capable of this. I never even finished school. I am just a servant." Richard said gently, "Your education or position is not important. Your heart is important, and I have seen that your heart is the purest of all." This moment was the greatest reward in Maria's life. She never dreamed that she would one day become the guardian of $1 billion fortune, and that too because she had sincerely helped others one day. Time passed and Richard's trust became famous all over the world. Orphanages, schools, hospitals, everywhere it helped. People used to say that it was all the result of a billionaire's change of heart. But Richard knew that it was all because of a simple woman, who one day used a card for humanity. Caroline, Emily and Natalie went their separate ways. Caroline still ran after the worldly glitter, but she never found the peace that Maria had in her heart. Emily presented Richard's decision to the world through her art and many people were inspired. Natalie made a name for herself in the business world, but she often thought that perhaps Maria's humility was her greatest success. And Maria, she was still the same humble and simple woman. She kept nothing for herself, she was still useful to others. But the world's biggest billionaire said about her, "This woman taught me that the real wealth is humanity." That was the sentence that was always written in history.